Hari friends, welcome to the third part on the series on the famines created by the British in India. So in this part we'll have a look at a certain individual who in large part was responsible for these ideas that excess population is bad, and these ideas had a overhang till even the last few years, and the trend has reversed in the last few years, and I'll also go into that in the slides. But let's first have a look at this worthy. Okay, so just bear with me, just getting the slides up. Yep, there we go. So let's meet Thomas Robert Malthus. So he was reverend. So he was a Christian cleric who also doubled up as a scholar, demographer, economist, and he kind of his lifetime was from the mid 18th century to the early or mid years of the 19th century, and his ideas were so influential that they influenced Western policy even till recent years regarding population growth, demographics, and high population is bad, and how it can be culled and so on. Now this excess population is bad was always regarding Asian populations, especially so India and China very specifically, not regarding the white European or Anglo-Saxon population. So their population growth is considered good even now, whereas India and China were kind of given this tonic that you need to control your population. China obviously very aggressively implemented because they had the Communist Party, leading to this family crisis, and now they have got a declining population and a fast aging population. Whereas India, we have just reached that peak, and thankfully in India it wasn't aggressively implemented, but it was kind of self-implemented by the Hindu population, leading to rapidly decreasing Hindu population. Whereas obviously the Muslims and Christians didn't follow family planning. So again, very kind of uneven. So even India's high population growth is quite uneven if you really look at the breakup of the demographics. But I'll go through that in another video. Okay, so Malthus, I call him a nutcase, and his theory a nutcase theory, because it had horrendous effects, especially in India, and which is why I'm talking about him in the context of famines. So he basically propounded a set of principles which make up his whole theory, and we can summarize them in three principles roughly. So principle one, so population growth is bad. So that's the fundamental thing. So high excess population is always bad, as it would grow to an extent where resources would no longer be enough to support it. So you would have basically too many mouths to feed, long story short. So what would be the next principle? So now if you had excess population growth, there were two types of checks. Okay, one was positive checks, which would raise the death rate. So positive checks would be famines, it could be natural disasters, wars, anything which would kill a large number of people, cause a massive die-off, and then you had a smaller population set. And preventative ones which would lower the birth rate. So contraception and all these kinds of things. So you can see these ideas propounded almost like what 150 years ago or 200 years ago. The control they had on Western governments, and through their fronts like the Ford Foundation and all these hundreds of different outfits, how they have influenced policy making in India and China as well. And the third principle was, so the positive checks include hunger, disease, and war, and the preventative checks, abortion, birth control, prostitution, postponement of marriage, and celibacy. So this was his theory. And why was he so influential? So if it had just been some XYZ person, that would have been understandable, but he taught history and political economy at the East India College at Haileybury in the United Kingdom. Now East India College was where all the officers and administrators of East India Company and later on the British occupation were trained. So all of these were indoctrinated in these ideas. And one of the, like I said, and I keep pointing out, population growth is considered bad for Asian and now African countries, but population growth is considered good if you are in Europe. And it was due to the high European population growth that they fundamentally moved out and colonized and occupied all these different continents and islands around the world. And there was a plan, I believe, obviously I don't approve, to kind of cause depopulation in India as well, so they could settle. But due to various reasons, that didn't come out. I think that's a topic for research. And Reverend Malthus, he was a Christian priest by training and inspired by Christian principles. So the fundamental fact is, that pagans or heathens, or as Muslims like to call us, kafirs. So these are at a level, at par with animals. So you can kill them off, and you would actually incur, punya or good deeds, rather than, you know, having bad karma to your account. So that karma principle anyway doesn't exist in Abrahamic religions. So as long as you follow whatever monotheistic god, you are all sorted for this life and for the afterlife or for judgment day. So his policies and his principles influenced all the viceroys, the governor generals of India, and also carried well over into the 20th century and even the early years of the 21st century. So it's only in the last 4 or 5 years that this realization has come about, that global population is actually going to reach a peak in another 30-40 years, and many countries, so if you think about Korea will probably lose around 90% or 96% of population within 3 generations. Japan is actually in negative growth. Russia has already gone into negative growth. So a lot of countries have gone into negative growth. China has already reached its peak, and now it's a rapidly aging population. So this realization has come about. But in the West, there's always this kind of relief that if you think about the US and a few other countries, their population is not declining. So it's still a kind of decent population growth. Okay. So like I pointed out, so this Haileybury College was the analog of the the Nazi or the Soviet indoctrination centers. So the British occupation of India is, I think, many times more terrible and horrific in what they did than even the Nazis or the Soviets. So Indians especially, should ask themselves the question: how many Indians were killed by the Germans? How many Indians were killed by the Japanese? And how many Indians were killed by the Soviets? And then they should ask the question: how many Indians were killed by the British? Okay, so this should reorient our view of history, because the history as it's taught in India is still very Eurocentric, and all the future British kind of viceroys who were really genocidal in chiefs were trained. And some of the prominent alumni of Haileybury College were Sir John Lawrence, so Viceroy of India from 1864 to 68. Sir Richard Temple, Governor of Bombay Presidency, 1877-1880. Now, this Temple character was quite unique because when he started his career in India, he was actually quite against the British policies which were leading to famines. But once he kind of came into a position of power, he had to suck up to his bosses. So then he became a fervent advocate of all these, Malthusian policies. And some of the Malthusian policies on the ground resulted in laws which prevented rich Indians from offering food and aid or charity in times of famines, when lakhs of people were dying of hunger. So the British principle was, it is known as, I think, utilitarian, which means you work and you earn, so you don't get free handouts. And this again was source of really crazy social engineering theories which wreaked havoc in Bharat during the British occupation and even well after independence. So I believe the Ford Foundation introduced this kind of scanning of the baby in the womb. There's a term for it, I don't remember, which led to massive female infanticide. And female infanticide started in the British time because of their land policies, which kind of disenfranchised girls who inherited the family's fortune or the lands. Okay, and this a good example of Malthus's ideas on the rulers of or the occupiers of India is from a note by Lord Ripon from 1880s. So I'll just read it verbatim. So if the famine mortality in 1879 be tested, it will be found that about 80% of the deaths come from the laboring classes, and nearly the whole of the remaining 20% from cultivators, so farmers, owning such minute plots of land as to be hardly removed from laborers. So these plots were under an acre, so very small. Although they died more rapidly than any other, still they reproduce themselves with sufficient rapidity to overcrowd every employment that is open to them. So these people are reproducing like rabbits, and I believe one of the viceroys had used the term rabbits as well. And obviously, if they are dying off, it doesn't matter because they'll reproduce more. So you can see how these theories had a very pernicious and a deadly effect, especially as we Indians were concerned. So this was kind of the narrative which was running till the last few years in the West. So this is just a random screenshot from I think LA Times from 2012. So you got a screenshot, you got a photo of an Indian couple with 2 kids. So fertility rates fall, but global population explosion goes on. So the population explosion isn't over; its effects are rampant. But as the global birth rate is, fewer people are speaking out. So they had already started to kind of trumpet, the change of wind around, 2010s. Okay, and this is kind of the situation now. So this is now kind of becoming the new normal. So you can see in this graph, this has been done by 2 researchers, Max Ross and Hannah Ritchie. So they've got a website as well. So our World in Data, so very good website with great graphs, and this kind of shows how the population has kind of reached a peak, and percentage wise it's kind of already starting to drop off. You can see from here around 2000s and around where we are 2023 24, it's already starting to drop off very rapidly. So this is kind of up to 23 and projected beyond. So that percentage drop off is going to be quite dramatic, and this will peak around 2100. So the world population is already in a decline overall, but that decline is quite uneven, so it's not evenly distributed. Okay. So you can see how this whole picture has turned, but the damage that has been done in the last 150 plus years has been tremendous. So India had a population growth of barely 1 or 2% during British rule, and the average life expectancy in the 1940s, which was a high expectancy, was 24 years. In the 19th century, the average expectancy was around 20 to 22 years. So yeah, tremendous hammering of population, tremendous hemorrhaging of money, and so on. So this was kind of the basic ideological premise on which all the British occupiers of India based their policies and caused massive genocides. Okay, so that's all, folks. So there's a typo here, so next slide won't be Malthusian madness. I'll just talk more about famines, go into more detail. So if you have liked this video, please remember to like, share and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Thank you.